Welcome to the world-famous Adventurers Club. I'm Craig Carroll, member number 1230. Over the past 101 years, through wars, depressions, and now pandemics, we have met nearly every Thursday evening to celebrate those who venture far off the beaten path. It is in this spirit this evening that I introduce to you an amazing explorer who defines the spirit of adventure. Please welcome Brian O'Hare. So there's a lot I want to talk about masculinity and things of that nature, but I'd love to just kind of touch on your book, Surrender, for a moment. We're going to come back to that. You're going to do a reading at the end. But why? Why the title? You know, what drove you to write this book?
Well, I mean, the epigraph, I think, is the correct term. I don't have an MFA, so...
Nor do I.
Yeah, exactly. It's the little bit that's at the beginning of the book, the quote from the Bible, usually, or something like that. Light word, but similar thing. Again, terrible Catholic. But what I love about what Hesse did with that is that it implies at the beginning of everything, myth was at the center of it, and that implies that we are all descendants of the myth. We're children of the myth, and that could be anything. You know, there's an infinite number of myths. You know, we have personal myths, familial myths, tribal myths, institutional myths, national myths, and you know, having spent 6 years in the Marine Corps. I would say that the Marine Corps, probably better than all the other services, is that it passes on its culture and its myth better. And I think that the mythology of the Marine Corps can only be rivaled by the world's great religions, which I think is kind of an amazing feat, you know, for this organization that started in 1775, and that this really is only a product since like 1917, and we were talking about this earlier. There was a savvy enough commandant Lejeune at that time, who clearly grasped the power of mass media in 1917. You had newspapers, film was becoming a thing, radio was only a couple years off. The beginning of like superhero culture, Babe Ruth was pitching for the Boston Braves at that time, soon to become Babe Ruth. But I think the amazing thing is that like Commandant Lejeune understood that and consciously created this mythology of the Marine Corps. So anyway, and not jumping ahead too far in the story, but when my father, who was a Marine pilot in Vietnam, who had his own huge mythology. I mean, just him as a person. He was this big, swaggering, silver-tongued New York Irishman, like equal parts like Jackie Gleason and, Gene Hackman's Popeye Doyle from French Connection. This mid-century badass who could handle anything in any situation. And he was a really fucking cool guy, too. Like
driving a muscle car in the air, right?
No, exactly. Flew an F1, which, again, as we were talking, is basically, it's like a curvy machine, but then it dropped napalm, and he flew 307 missions in Vietnam, and was not only did he do that, he was shot down on his last mission that he wasn't even supposed to go on. And as if his own personal mythology couldn't get bigger, his canopy wouldn't open. So he had to take his K-bar survival knife and pry his canopy open. And while the canopy blew, his back was twisted. He broke his back, landed in Da Nang Harbor, actually found the two sailors who pulled him out of the water. There's a surfer in Ventura County, lives right off of where that big thing that's on fire, I don't know, right before you get to Santa Barbara.
Right.
Anyway, surfer dude, and the other guy lives in Henderson, Nevada, and they still dream about pulling my father out of the water. It's kind of amazing. So anyway, my father then hitches this massive personal mythology
to that of the Marine Corps. Again, this organization that is like Christianity or Judaism or, you know, Islam or Buddhism or something like that. And that combination of those two things was just overwhelming. I was like powerless.
And you were how old at this time when he was in the Marine Corps and he was flying?
Like 0 to like 1.5.
You were like a zygote.
I was, yeah, exactly. I was quite literally a zygote. And I was born before he went to Vietnam. And, you know, I was like a 1.5 or a year when he got shot down. So anyway, it's this thing that's just loomed. It's essentially, you know, it's this family mythology too, that again, and he consciously sort of like gassed up that personal mythology and the mythology of the Marine Corps. So I was kind of like, I was screwed from.
What was his name?
Jim Hare.
So what would Jim say about the no socks in the shoes? Would he give you grief for this look? Or because you grew up in a hyper-masculine environment.
Yeah, but here's the thing, though. I mean, let's refer back to, like, my dad was a cool guy.
Yeah.
Went to NYU 1960 to 64. So if you were hanging around, you know, the Village, 60 to 64, like Scorsese was class of 64 as well. And, you know, there were some pretty interesting folks.
Pretty avant-garde.
Yeah, I wouldn't say that he probably felt like super kinship to those people. But he was a really cool New Yorker who had seen a few things, and he kind of had his own sort of thing. It was more like on the jock side, I guess. I think, you know, like all of us who have kids here, you know, we have these kids, and you see them as almost sort of like better versions of us.
Well, I think I'm pretty perfect, so I'm not sure if I could.
Well, I know, exactly. I haven't talked to Max yet.
He's pretty great.
I've just looked at Max. I can tell already he's better than you are. Let's talk later, Max. So my father saw me, and I kind of think he sort of went like, oh, wow, okay. Like, this guy's, I'm answering the question about the socks.
I got it. I'm tracking.
I know. I just want to make sure you don't get, like, freaked out. So you kind of like, he was sort of like Dr. Frankenstein in a way. And so he spends all this time, he spends 18 years creating the perfect monster. Who I'm going to put the Marine Corps into your brain.
High school football. Tell me about that. Like, what was your hyper masculine father making his hyper masculine son do?
Well, he didn't like. Okay, that's a really interesting question too, because it's very nuanced in a way. Okay, so he's creating. So yes, I am Frankenstein's monster.
You're like the Klay, right? He's molding,
I'm the Klay.
making big big Popeye muscles.
Exactly. In the whole, here's how he would have liked to have been brought up. But here's the, again, if my knowledge of the Frankenstein story serves me correctly, well, the monster breaks loose at a certain point, right? And he goes, the little girl gives him flowers, and then they kill him, right? So in some ways, I was kind of like the monster that broke loose. And so my father has all this in him in a way, but he had it like in the line of shit, the talking aspect. But he was pretty straight, you know what I mean? And as far as his path. And because I'm the monster, I'm like, well, screw it, man. I wear some creepers and I have to wear socks and, I don't care. And I think it freaked him out. And I don't know what point that he realized that the monster was out of his control, because the monster was pretty good up until about age 28, did all those things.
Yeah, like you played high school football, you went into the Marine Corps, you got with the program.
Absolutely. And I have to say, it's, again, whether I'm 50-50, like pure artist, 50% Marine or whatever, I'm probably 51%, pure artist, and 49% like, let's bayonet the enemy type, or, whatever. I'm just saying, like this aggressive kind of thing that we're talking about. And so, of course, like I grew up in Western Pennsylvania. I don't know if there's anybody here from that part of the world. The entire country loves high school football. Western Pennsylvania and Texas, I think, loves it a little more than everybody else does.
And what position did you play?
I was a center, believe it or not. And again, this is, I mean, you look at me, I'm probably about 175 pounds now.
All wet.
All wet, and that's for later too.
Stop it, you.
You have a shower here, right?
Easy, boy.
Anyway, you know, and this is too, it's like, is the biggest division in Western Pennsylvania, it's the Quad A. Like the first guy that I ever played against when I was a sophomore, I'm like 175, 180 pounds. He was like 6'7", like 260. He got drafted by the Raiders. He played for the Raiders for like 5 years.
And how did that feel when he hit you?
I mean, it was fine. Like, I ate his lunch. I mean, here's this big, tall guy, and you got to, like, employ your knowledge of sort of, like, you know, geometry.
Physics.
Yeah, and physics, like, he'd line up just, like, you know, a quarter of an inch too far to the left side. And, like, I almost, like, precluded his NFL career because his knees were right there. But so, anyway, the point of all this is that my father was always sort of, like, you know, mushing me through this. Like, I always think of my childhood as almost sort of like, it was like a cattle chute. It had to end up at this one place. And it took me through all these stops. In high school football in Western Pennsylvania is one of them. And two, we weren't just like a team. We were like USA Today, top 25 in the nation. You know,
Big crazy coach, right? Didn't you have some power coach?
Yes, I don't know if anybody's read the book, but I mean, there are like, we touch on that. And my coach, too, he's not just like a coach. He just retired. Okay, so he came onto my radar when I was 11. I'm 56. He just retired like 2 years ago. He's the winningest coach in the history of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. And again, here's a state that values that a little bit more than every other place does. So this guy's kind of a deity in this state. So it's all these, like, again, these levels of, like, inflated masculinity.
I'm going to take a leap of faith here and say that that guy's never leaving the state of Pennsylvania.
Yeah, why would he?
Yeah,
I mean,
he's a big shot.
He's exactly. And he's an interesting guy too. I'm actually going to do a reading in my township library outside of Pittsburgh, and I'm going to invite him to. It's going to be interesting. I mean, maybe we blow that whole place up, but it'll be interesting.
Tell me about Manifest Destiny. Or switch gears here.
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, certainly Manifest Destiny plays into the tribal or the national mythology of two things. Certainly this country, and as this country is the manifestation of a certain kind of white male, that this, you know, this WASP, I think, sort of idea of dominating in a way. I mean, it's certainly, Manifest Destiny is kind of, we'll say it's like a cousin or a bed partner of the patriarchy in a way, and of this mythology. The mythology, I think, serves concepts like Manifest Destiny. You know, I think we were talking before, you think about it, like, why would any of us send our kids to go, like, I was in the Persian Gulf War. Well, it's pretty clear about what that was about. I mean, if it was Sudan and South Sudan, I don't think I would have been in South Sudan with, you know, 500,000 other Navy, Marine Corps, Army, Air Force people.
Because there's no oil, right?
There's no oil. So I think that is something that became very clear to me, being in the Persian Gulf War, that, well, there's one reason why we're here. And that's because, well, you know, we're messing, like, the Iraqis are messing with a lot of very rich, important people's bottom lines. And they're like, you know what? Make this stop. The oil needs to flow because we're losing money. So I think, you know, that's actually, in a way too, it's a kind of manifest destiny. And you think about, like, well, why would any of us contribute our sons or daughters to such a thing unless there was, again, mythology behind it that made it palatable? You know, again, back to this period of World War I, we had a great advertising slogan for that: the war to end all wars. okay, you know.
Oh boy, a little bad advertising there, right?
No, exactly. But for the time, for the crisis, for whatever, you know, the U.S. government needed people to go to, you know, from Los Angeles or Honolulu to a trench in France, it at least ennobled the potential sacrifice that us as parents or as brothers or sisters or friends, you know, at least we could justify it in some way. So that's a very meandering way, I think, of addressing your question, but I think it's all tied together.
Is there nobility, let me see how to phrase this. Is there nobility in fighting a war under false pretenses? In other words, as you're saying that, you know, we wouldn't be sending the same resources to South Sudan that we were sending to Iraq or the Persian Gulf.
Yeah.
So is there nobility in that as a fighter, as a warrior, which you are?
Sure.
Fought in the Persian Gulf, and you obviously had a big aha moment while you were there when you realized that, what was it, Smedley Butler? I was a gangster for capitalism. Like,
Yeah.
You know, first of all, let's answer the nobility question, and let's talk about Smedley Butler a little bit, because
yeah, absolutely. I do think, here's the kind of like the conundrum, I guess, is that I do think between us, those of us in this room, Larry, Adrian, you know, other people who've served here, that there is a nobility in the commitment that we've all made to each other, which is really, dare I use the word sacred, but again, it's based out of love, I think. So yes, on that level, there certainly is. I think, unfortunately, though, that love, just for a shorthand about it, is manipulated and it is misused. And while there is, yes, nobility, again, between all of us who've served, you know, I think it's ignoble, I guess if that's how you pronounce the word, that is misused like that. And I don't think there is nobility in waging war by false pretenses. Because again, this, you know, you hear that whole like truth, justice, and the American way thing. Well, you know, like I think personally, I think we should live up to those ideals.
So what was your aha moment? Like, you clearly had a moment where you're like, you know, what are we doing here?
True, and I mean, I have to say that, and you know, this is, maybe it's understandable, but it is a little embarrassing to admit that the time when I had that revelation or that aha moment came for me, the first time when I felt that my mortality was imminent. We were outside of Kafji. This is in late January 1991. It's the middle of the night. And, you know, there's all this, again, for the 8.5 minutes or whatever it was, it seemed like forever that, you know, I probably was not even in that much danger. But the first time, you know, you see tracers and, you know, flares and people are shooting rockets and they're landing kind of near you, you know, whether that's 100 yards away, like, I don't even know. It was confusing, but.
The fog of war, right? That's what they talk about, the fog of war.
Absolutely. But I will have to say that there's a big part of me that in that moment felt very sorry for myself. Oh, this is bullshit. You know, it's the middle of the night. Nobody knows I'm here and I'm going to die. And this is, you know, and I kind of had that aha moment. I was like, oh, like this is maybe not completely justified that I be here. But again, it was all about my ego and about you know, my flame being extinguished. But also, too, in that moment, there was kind of that realization or that other aha moment of like, all right, buddy, like, you thought the Marine Corps was cool. Those uniforms, they're pretty badass. And you wanted to wear that thing, and you wanted to be able to call yourself a Marine because that's pretty cool too. And you know, your dad, and like, you want to be this guy. You don't want to just be like him. You want that magic. And that's the way that you get that magic. Whatever that is, let's sort it out later, like in a book or something like that. And so it was kind of like, all right, you put yourself here. and you got to suck it up. And you don't get to choose how they use you or whether you think it's a good idea or not. Because, you know, the military is just, it's an interesting thing, because I think oftentimes people will have this sort of like misguided anger, shall we say, certainly during Vietnam, at the military. Well, really, I mean, we have civilians in charge of the military for a reason. And the military is like a tool. It's like a chainsaw, a very dangerous tool. But you need somebody to pull the, you know, the cord on it or something like that, and then it starts going. But if you haven't read like the, you know, the instructions manual, or use it while you're drunk or in an unsafe manner, well, you might lose some limbs and you might kill some people, and it might be bad, but it's not the chainsaw's fault, because it is being handled by somebody else. And in our case, we have a civilian in charge of the military. So again, yeah, I don't know where I was going with that, but it's kind of a cool analogy.
It's kind of cool. I want to talk a little bit about Smedley Butler, because I thought this author was really interesting. He was a general, right? A Marine Corps general? Or, yeah. So tell me about the book he wrote.
Well, I have to confess, I've never read the book.
Well, how can you tell me about it then?
Because I have Smedley Butler is just, he's a legend,
right?
He's a legend.
What was it? I was a gangster for capitalism.
I was a gangster for capitalism. So here's this general. I mean, Smedley Butler is like, again, you want to talk about mythology in the Marine Corps. Excuse me. Like, Smedley Butler is like, he's up there. He's one of the saints, if you want to call it. Like, again, so if the Marine Corps is a religious order or a cult, it depends on your perspective on the whole thing, but there are a lot of parallels. Smedley Butler is like one of the saints. And actually, well, okay, hold on for a second. So he's huge, but sometime in the 1930s, he had his own aha moment, and I should read the book, but he realized, again, this thing that we're talking about, that the U.S. military, in a way, is just sort of like the bullies for Wall Street, in a way. Or I guess in his case at the time, it was like for the United Fruit Company in, you know, Nicaragua or something like that, in Haiti. And well, part of how I know about it, I have a print that a friend who's an Army, Iraq and Afghanistan veteran who has a print studio in central New York made, and it's a quote from Smedley Butler. The best takeaway quote from that is, "There are no enemies, only business opportunities." Wow. Again, this is coming from a saint of the Marine Corps in basically 100 years ago. So it's not some flavor of the month kind of like whatever. He's trying to parlay this into some kind of a career. That's pretty heavy duty.
Wasn't it Eisenhower that did the whole speech about the military-industrial complex? I always thought that was fascinating. Maybe you can touch on that for people who don't know it.
But actually it is. I mean, it's like Eisenhower, you know, he warned against the military-industrial complex. And, you know, you think about it, when he left office, what is it, 1960? Oh, what did we start to do around 1960? Well, we decided that maybe we should get involved in Vietnam. And completely, I mean, like almost as like when the words are out of Eisenhower's mouth that, you know, the U.S.
Beware.
Yeah, exactly. The U.S. government and, you know, General Motors or whoever it is like, let's do this. Let's make a lot of money. So, yes, Eisenhower. So
your dad died fairly young, right? I mean, you're 56, I'm 56. He died when he was 56, right?
Yes, I've officially outlived my father right now, which I don't know how many of us out here who have done that, but it's a little freaky because I don't consider myself to be old. And my father was already dead for a long time, you know, whatever, 9 months by the time he was my age.
And how old were you when he died?
Like 32.
So you really got to watch this progression. Do you feel like he was happy with his life? Was he proud of what he had done, or did he have unrealized dreams or expectations, or was he projecting those unrealized expectations on you?
Yeah, it's a great question. And here's like a cautionary tale to all of us who have kids and who hope to have kids. I'm going to say there were things in his life that he was very satisfied with. I think, in a way, in his defense, he was a guy that very early on envisioned, I guess, what we would call now like social justice. And to him, in a way, it was more, he would never have used a term like that because it just wouldn't have been him. But I think he saw things in terms very broadly of like, this is right and this is wrong. After he retired from the Marine Corps, he went to work for Eastern Airlines, and then not as a pilot, but as an administrator. And then when that went out of business, he worked for Northwest Airlines. And I got to see when he worked at Northwest Airlines at National Airport in Washington, D.C., like when I was at basic school, which is like the Marine Officers Boot Camp, I got to see him a lot there because I flew a lot from D.C. to New York and this sort of thing, having a good time. Basically, again, too, this is like the late 80s, not this world that we have now. Basically, if you were an other at Northwest Airlines, and I mean whether you're a person of color, gay, lesbian, whatever, you wanted to work for my father at Northwest Airlines at National Airport because he was, back again to this nobility question, this commitment that we all make with each other, those were like, they could have been his Marines. And he was fierce in sheltering them and protecting them from a not very,
welcoming environment.
Yeah, exactly. So it was kind of interesting. So in some ways, I think that was probably very satisfying to him, but I think in a lot of ways, he had a lot of fear as far as, again, back to the not wearing socks and this sort of thing. I think he saw and had those feelings. Again, big personality, but I think there was a lot of fear in realizing what he was totally capable of. And actually, I got to say, too, and here's just the other, layer, peel of the onion in a way, was that when I got out of the Marine Corps, before my father got sick, and I did not go to law school like I was supposed to, because obviously I like to talk, and I'm kind of okay at it.
So you were supposed to because that was his goal for you.
Of course. Yeah. And I didn't because, 28 years is a long time to live somebody else's life and to be in a cattle chute.
Is that what you felt like your entirety of your sort of life had been to realize his unrealized dreams?
Well, yeah, but I don't think at that point that I understood it to be as such then. Because, again, I wanted to play. I loved playing football. I loved being football captain. I loved, going after these things. Initially, I loved the Naval Academy. And, I got to be totally honest, after the sort of reality of that place set in, people ask too sometimes, how'd you go from being a Marine to being a filmmaker and a writer? I'm like, well, the smart ass answer is clearly I got some bad career advice. And again, the saving grace, I think, for the Naval Academy was the people. Here's some amazing people that went to the Naval Academy who had whatever, everybody was going through their own relationship with that place. That place did not care whether I liked it or not. We loved it. Again, this is my opinion. We loved it, but it didn't love us back. And the Marine Corps is the same way, and they just did not care. So I did not enjoy the Naval Academy. I did not enjoy the Marine Corps. Again, the saving grace of the Marine Corps was my Marines. Those guys were amazing. That was a transformative experience for me. And sometimes I think, it's that old question, oh, well, knowing what you know now, and you could, go back and do a different path, would you do something different? As much as that was, again, bad career advice or whatever, I don't think so. I'd probably do the exact same thing because I would not be this person right now and having this particular worldview without that experience, having met those people. I wouldn't change that at all. So again, back to my father. Yeah, I don't know. I think he died probably kind of frustrated and probably thought that he didn't understand me. But again, that's what happens when you're Dr. Frankenstein, though. and the monster outlives you. So
It seems sort of incongruent that he would be, when he was an administrator at Eastern, that he would be so warm and welcoming to people that were not hyper masculine on any level.
yeah, I mean, that's really interesting. And it's a good, like,
But he couldn't embrace you as a human being, just being who you wanted to be. He had to make you into this hyper masculine, version of himself. I mean, as I understand your story.
yeah, again, I think it's one of those things. I guess he said something along the lines of sort of like, it's kind of like okay for other people to do. You want to do something crazy, some social experience, like you want to go protest or whatever, like that's awesome, and he's in support of it. We're not going to do it though, because there's way too much to lose.
The O'Hara family is not going to be out there.
No, definitely not. And so I think whether it was like supporting, again, with the broad term of like the other at Northwest Airlines. I mean, my father hated bullies. I hate bullies myself, and that was actually one of the reasons, like, that really appeals to me about the U.S. military and the Marine Corps. Even as ridiculous as, like, the Persian Gulf War was, we went and, like, smacked around some, like, bullies. The Iraqis were not doing good or noble things in Kuwait. They were terrible, but they hadn't counted on, like, so they were like the big neighborhood bully, and then like the big bully shows up, and it's like, same thing like in Bosnia, you know what I mean? I was in Serbia, was it like 12 years ago for a film festival, and so this is like 2009, 2010, and I'm hanging out with this Serbian guy, like, yeah, I don't know if I've described him as a Serb nationalist, but he's a pretty intense guy. We pour a bunch of like pivo and rakia down our throats, and this is the first night that I'm there, and he gets to that point where he's going to start asking me questions. He's like, "Why didn't you just let us like solve our own problems?" You know what I mean? Because I hate America, and obviously like the Croats would have something else to say about that, but here I was in Belgrade, but again, it's just another one of those examples. Like they were the big bully in the Balkans, and they were doing genocide and all this stuff, and then all of a sudden NATO steps in, which is de facto U.S., and well, that sucks. But it was a bigger bully coming in like smacking down a smaller bully, and that's what happened in the Persian Gulf as well. And like, there's a part of like, again, back to my father, that he hated bullies. I hate bullies. I detest bullies. So that always sort of like played into my head as well.
But you talk about the Marines being a sort of how did you describe it? An exercise in imperialism, which I thought was really interesting.
Well, I mean, again, it's back to the metaphor or whatever of it's a tool. And so what's interesting, I think, in particular about the Navy and Marine Corps and the U.S. military is that it's basically, again, to quote like Smedley Butler, there are no enemies, only business opportunities. And the U.S. military gets used to make that happen. So it is the front lines of like imperialism. Mm-hmm. Again, you even think about like the Spanish-American War, which actually I think is a really fascinating war, because 1898 becomes this year, like I think that the beginning of America, the one that we know now, is kind of started in 1898, because all of a sudden we go like, we ought to have an empire. Like we're this like burgeoning superpower. We got this amazing Navy. We need to project power around the world. And so the Spanish, we can kick the Spanish ass. We can have this like pretext of like, well, you're in our hemisphere, you know what I mean, in Cuba, and they're fighting for freedom. Hey, message to Garcia, right, Dale? Yeah, I mean, that's all Spanish-American War, which is just all imperialism. But I think the kind of amazing thing, back to this transformative aspect of spending time in the Navy and Marine Corps, is that out of this thing comes this amazing sort of like tolerance in a way that people from very different backgrounds. Okay, so the U.S. military, the most diverse tribe in the history of humanity. I mean, I I challenge anyone to name a more diverse tribe of people. Like even, maybe there was something during Roman times where they got people from all over the empire, but I would bet that the US military has more diverse people. And out of that, there's this, in spending time with all these people, like really like quality time, I think we are able to get beyond the superficial things that divide us, such as, millennium content, such as gender, such as who you sleep with or don't sleep with, or who you pray to or don't pray to. And we get to know each other strictly on this like human level of like, oh, Craig, good guy. I trust that guy with my life.
Hyper-masculine.
Hyper-masculine. Well, that's a superficial thing. But, I mean, whether, like, again, like, people, there's Marines that, like, steal other Marines, like, credit card applications and stuff. And it's not, the person then doesn't become, like, a Jewish thief or a Irish or whatever, gay. That person is a thief. I can't trust that person. Whereas I think in society, society would probably more put labels on things. And I think in the military, this amazing sort of like knowledge of each other happens. And then we all go out into society as well, and we take that with us in that experience with like, oh yeah, I remember I used to serve with a guy or guys or women or whatever who were, I went to one of my Marines' 50th birthday party in Houston, like pre-pandemic, and one of the guys there, a black guy, had said that before he went to boot camp, he didn't know that white people also too had like similar problems, because I think we all live in these bubbles in a way. And it was an aha moment for him. Some guy that was on the rack next to him over there, he's like, oh wow, this guy's a lot like me. Coming from a background of like whatever, having to struggle to get by. And I think that everybody sort of has an experience like that. And again, like I said, for me, it was utterly transformational, coming from basically like a middle class to upper middle class, and now upper middle class to like upper class, because I think everything just like got jacked up, like richer or poorer. There's not
a big delta for sure.
Oh, sorry. Yeah,
there's a big delta.
And I mean, that was the U.S. military was my first real experience with like real diversity. And it began, I have to say, at the Naval Academy. Even in the 1980s, the U.S. Navy they were trying. They screwed up in multiple ways, and so did the Marine Corps too. And it was clunky and terrible. I mean, especially, I gotta say that like the treatment that, my female classmates got, like, so the first class of women graduated from the academies in 1980. It's desegregated by sex in 1976. So I graduated in 1988. Just terrible. And I would have to say, so I am kind of a testament to this understanding thing. So we'll say 2 years ago, with a classmate of mine, he's a retired Marine colonel. He's about as masculine as it gets. Lives in Fredericksburg, Virginia, and we're eating oysters and drinking bourbon and beer, and we're well into the evening.
Talking about John Wayne, Marlboro Man, the whole nine?
No. Don't even get me started on John Wayne and what John Huston said about John Wayne. Anyway, but he just sort of turns to me in the middle of that night and he goes, you know what, Brian? He goes, you know what I regret? He goes, I regret that we didn't support our female classmates better. And again, this is just like two Marines sitting around drinking beer and bourbon in a basement. And he said that, and it was actually, for me, it was a rather profound admission or regret for him to say, and it like struck, again, a light bulb went off, and I was like, this is so true. And then I don't see any of, I'm guessing there's no female graduates of any of the military academies here, or even if there was anybody that was in the military, a female, but I have to say, we failed you. We didn't support you like we should have. So again, I don't know what the point of all that was.
Well, here at the Adventures Club, I want you to know that we do support our women adventurers. We have a trailblazing women series. We have a couple of women here this year.
Yeah, she was revelatory the other week.
We're a big believer in sort of learning from the lessons of the hypermasculine Marines. So I'd like to talk a little bit about your book. You started to talk about what drove you to write the book. So maybe you can kind of share with us some of your inspiration.
Well, I got to say that my father dying from Agent Orange-related prostate cancer and spending 2 months with him, his last 2 months of being alive at Bethesda Naval Hospital, was a big sort of aha moment in its own way.
It's profound to watch somebody die. I mean, let's talk about that. For me, there's an honesty in watching somebody die because there's no pretense anymore. The pretense is gone.
It's all gone.
Yeah.
And again, at the beginning of the talk, I'd sort of told you about, like, again, this huge mythology that my father had, that he cultivated, quite, I mean, he could have just been, it was effortless for him. He's a super charismatic, cool guy. But then he worked at cultivating this thing. And then to watch it all get stripped away, especially, especially that he basically didn't talk to me for the last 5 years of his life. And
because why?
Because the monster
you didn't go to law school.
The monster got out of control.
Yeah.
And it freaked him out. And so rather than going like, hey, again, message to parents, would-be parents, and I have a 20-year-old and a 14-year-old, is that, like, even if you don't understand what's going on, I think it's okay to admit that, like, I actually have no advice for you right now, and I'm a little scared because you're in an Ivy League school or whatever it is, and I only went to, like, wherever. And I think the kid will really appreciate that and can establish communication. Well, my father never did that, for being like this big, again, swashbuckling, just dive in there type guy. When it came to me, he didn't have that same sort of courage. So I spent this last 2 months with him, and I watched all that stuff just go away, the mythology. And he was then dependent on me, which was freaky, because here's this huge guy that was capable of anything. And basically, he was like begging me to, like, massage his legs. And I just wiped him down with a wet washcloth for 2 months. And he was like a baby. He was dependent on, like, a really, a baby in pain, in unimaginable pain. And I think, too, there's a certain point and you get kind of like addicted to morphine in a way, because they're like, oh, you're not coming out of here, so we're just going to pump you full of morphine and kill the physical pain. But sadly, I think part of this process, I think morphine kind of brings its own sort of pain. But again, like Western medicine is like, oh, whatever you got, that your legs ache, we'll give you morphine. But again, I think there was a psychological box, or Pandora's box, if you want to call it, that got opened up, which was really horrifying to witness. But again, like you said, it was like one of probably the worst thing that I've ever done, in a way, too, kind of like the best thing that I've ever done.
You mean caring for him in the last couple of months?
Yeah, because I got to say, too, given our fraught last 5 years of our relationship, again, given the close relationship that we had, I don't have to go to therapy and talk to a therapist about, like, oh, I wish I'd said this to my father. Or I wish, like, he knew, you know what I mean? And yeah, he just knew. He knew that I was there, and he knew that I knew, and I knew that he knew, and all this stuff. And, like, so all the questions were, though we didn't say a lot, all the questions were answered. Mm-hmm. And he left knowing, whatever. We both left with nothing unresolved. And so that was a very profound experience.
So did you feel a certain freedom when he had died? I mean, let's talk about that.
That's a really, like, you want to talk about something that sounds like heresy or taboo. I have to say, like, it was very freeing for him to die. And I think, particular with sons, you don't really get to be your own man in a way until your father leaves the scene. And I have to say that that's part of like what this book is about. The book is called Surrender, and it's called Surrender for a reason. It's about surrendering the mythology and having my father die when he did, allowed me to surrender and surrender his mythology so I could let go of that and to, again, become this guy that doesn't mind showing up in public with no socks on.
I think you have lovely ankles.
Thank you. I do. They're kind of nice. They're sort of slim. But yeah, I mean, sometimes it's not a bad thing when people leave. It would have been nice if you could have stuck around and you could have like come around and appreciated like what I was trying to do. But my life would be very different.
What do you think he would say now? What do you think he would say about the 2023 Brian O'Hare?
Oh, I think he would be like, that's pretty fucking cool. I think he would have been like, wow, you rolled the dice. You knew this whole time. And you doubled down on your bets and like it all worked out. I think there'd be no denying, you know what I mean? That he would be like, wow. Yeah, I'm totally confident of that. There's just, because again, the guy, like, he loved me so much that he had to like control me, you know what I mean? To make sure that I turned out all right.
It's interesting how somebody like that expresses love, right? It's not like the love that I would tell my son that I love him and I hug him. It's a different type of love. It's a hard love. I don't know if it's even love. It's sort of like you said, you were sort of, what was the term you used? Like driven down a cattle?
It was like a cattle chute.
Yeah, it was like a cattle chute.
And he knew, and I gotta say, by NYPD beat cops at some point.
I grew up in New York in the 70s, and I can tell you it was an ultra-violent environment. You were far more afraid of the cops than you were of the bad guys.
Yeah, and here's this guy that like checked all, he's this like, baseball and basketball star or player at NYU, white guy, going into the Marine Corps. Again, like I think he got robbed by the cops. So I understand in some ways, when I come on the scene, he's like, okay, here's the deal. I know what the world is like out there, and it has to be this way. So, I mean, yeah, he's to be forgiven for that, but it doesn't mitigate the need to surrender the mythology and to demythologize.
So what lessons from your relationship with your father do you have two boys?
No, I have a 20-year-old daughter and a son.
So what are the lessons that you took away from your experience with your father and that you incorporated in raising your children? You didn't see that one coming, did you?
No.
That wasn't on our list.
No, again, it's, as always, Craig, a lot of good questions from you.
I can just tell you that my father was a total jerk, and I have looked at how he treated me, and I've tried to be completely different with my relationship with my son, and so I credit my father with teaching me how not to be. So I don't know if you had the same experience, but
yeah, I think that is probably the main thing. So again, my daughter, again, she's 20, so she's a sophomore at the University of Pennsylvania. Terrific school.
Nice, good school.
She's a machine. I mean, actually, it's interesting, again, thinking back on it, she's a much better candidate for the Naval Academy and the Marine Corps than I ever was.
Is that where she's going? Is she going into the military?
I hope not. But I mean,
she's going to be an imperialist around the world?
No, she's very, she's not that.
Okay.
But I would say, though, it's interesting. You look at your kids, and I think we make a lot of stereotypical, or traditionally, parents make a lot of stereotypical judgments of children based on gender. But the real truth of the matter is, and she's, my wife is back there, I hope she's awake, but she knows this. But as I had told my son, I was like, look, here's the deal. Your sister and your mom are way tougher than you and I are. And maybe even physically, too. What's that?
Maybe.
I don't know, I'm a pretty...
They're turning on you. You better watch it.
I know where you live. But I mean, it's just a fact for so many reasons. And I know that my son is cut from my cloth in a way. You know, your kids are a mixture of both, but my son is more me than me.
Declan, right? Declan.
Yeah, Declan. And my daughter, Noelani, is way more like her mom. And so it's this, to your point, I think there's this realization of being very honest about who we are as people and expectations and that sort of thing. And even like there was this point when my daughter, like I took my daughter on this road trip for all these schools that she got accepted into the Northeast, and all great schools. And she was like, in the middle of the road trip, she's like, where should I go to school? Like they're all so amazing. And to the point of like not being like your father, I was like, I don't know. It's just like, this is your journey. You have to make the decision. Where my father would have been like, I mean, there wasn't even a choice. I got accepted at Cornell in the Naval Academy. And I remember I made the suggestion that maybe, that was gonna be like on an NROTC scholarship, so no money, nobody's paying for anything except for the US government. And man, I made that suggestion. My dad didn't talk to me for 2 weeks till I just caved in and I was like, I guess I'll go to the Naval Academy. Like, that is unconscionable, and I would never do that to my kids. So to your point, when my daughter was like, where should I go to school? I don't know, you gotta be happy. It has nothing to do with me.
I just tell my kid I'm tremendously flawed, so when you're in therapy someday, you can say, my dad copped to the fact that he's tremendously flawed, and...
They'll be, exactly, I mean, to be totally honest, because I have a huge ego, that part of me wants my kids to worship me in the same manner that I worship my father. That's all ego talking right there. The practical side, the side that has, is tuned into evolution in, the betterment of the human species, is that I want to free my kids of me in my mythology, in a way that I'd wish that my father had, that I had to do on my own, that I want to give my kids like a head start. Hey, I'm flawed. No, I don't know. This is, I am tough. I am, very definitely. But I am not as tough as, again, your mom or your sister. Let there be no...
Well, they got to have babies. I mean, cranking a bowling ball out of, that's
Trust
pretty
me,
gnarly.
That's part of that thing too.
That's
like
tough.
I witnessed that twice.
Yeah.
Wow.
Respect.
No drugs either.
There'd be no children if men had to have children, for sure.
Oh, not at all.
Can we read some of your book? Would you mind
Absolutely.
reading a couple of sections? So you have some interesting names. So Gas is one of them. Fuck Music is another. We're not going to read that one, but I love it. The Male Thief, which I thought was a great name. I love Thank You for Your Service, Sucker.
Yeah.
So let's end with that. But let's start out with Gas, if you wouldn't mind reading a few pages from that.
Am I going to do it right from this chair here?
I mean, that would be the best if you want to be in camera, yeah.
I do. I have an ego, like I said. All right, so here's the first.
Maybe set it up for them.
Yeah, a couple things. So, well, first I'm going to say there's some salty language in both of these stories. And actually, you've already said some salty language, but I'm just going to say that if anybody doesn't want to hear salty language, here is your one warning, and I'll say nothing else.
It's a salty language club. We embrace salty language.
I get it, but I just have to say something. So basically, all right, these are two stories kind of. First one is about Persian Gulf War. Second one is about after the Persian Gulf War. I think given everything we've talked about, I think we've established enough context for these two stories. And this will probably take about, I'm going to say about 12 minutes total. So please bear with me. So the first story is Gas. Let me take a little wet my whistle here.
You're getting some gas.
I am getting some gas. You want to see a Marine freak out? Tell him he's got 10 seconds to don and clear his gas mask because there's a cloud of nerve gas coming his way. I stood in a pit, the entranceway to our bunker, brushing my teeth, thinking of nothing. Just across the border in Kuwait, burning oil wells pulsed against a black sky. It was late January 1991, outside Kafji, Saudi Arabia. Bumfuck nowhere, as my Marines might say. From hidden speakers, warning voices broke open the night, strangely detached, as if announcing departing flights at an airport. Gas, gas, gas. Mop 4, this is not a drill. Ghost sirens, like the wailing of lost children called out from the desert. Fuck. Mop gear is what you wore in case of a chemical or biological attack. A bulky charcoal-lined suit with hood, gloves, rubber boot covers, and a gas mask. Munches scream, but without luxury of a mouth. The stuff of dread. Toothpaste dribbling from my chin. I watched my Marines tumble out of the bunker, half asleep and cursing, struggling into their mop gear. Sergeant Travis asked where I wanted the machine guns, but my mind remained a guilty blank. As lieutenant, the quote, boss man, I'm supposed to know such things. Staff Sergeant Brawley, lipped packed with Copenhagen, jogged toward me from somewhere in the dark, a quote, victory lap of sorts, all swagger and cool, as if he'd just knocked out his opponent in the first round of the Golden Gloves and was headed for a hot shower. Hola, senor. Senor, Brawley's nickname for me. He called me that when we were drinking beer. I hadn't had a beer in months. Hola. The word caught as if too big for my throat. Brawley's pale eyes lit up the dark. Me and old Gibbs was playing bones down in Ops. Recon reported a shit ton of tanks crossing the border up in Kafji. He pointed to an orange blur on the horizon where Kafji apparently lay, burning. A whole Iraqi armor division. Saudis bolted, so it's wide open. They're just cruising on down like it's the Paddy's Day parade in Fort Wayne. Brawley worked his dip. Looks like we're earning our pay tonight, senor. Most people, myself included, would have considered this to be very bad news, but Brawley just laughed. Maybe he was different from me, from the rest of us, his Hoosier Irish veins full of something more. Lying on the berm, I watched the sky in front of me burn white with tracers and silent explosions, like heat lightning from the beginning of the world when all was darkness and void. I heard my breathing, labored and loud in the mask, threatening to betray me. My heart jackrabbited against my ribs, eager to run, looking for an exit, but with nowhere to go. I couldn't see. The small pair of prescription glasses that fitted in the mask were thousands of miles away, somewhere in Okinawa. My pistol was filthy too, a hanging offense, the slide full of demon sand. As I had removed the pistol from the holster, I thought about my father, a Marine pilot in Vietnam, flew 307 missions, won a chest full of medals, the whole deal. He even carried a Smith & Wesson Victory. That's the actual name. It's a six-shooter, like some spaghetti Western cowboy ready for his widescreen shootout. My pistol, in comparison, seemed Mickey Mouse, a toy or prop with all the gravity of a child going bang, bang with his finger. Only officers carry pistols, so they're special, symbols more than anything, of authority, like a scepter or a badge, a judge's gavel even. My father once told me of how he'd shot a Marine in the foot for disobeying an order. Probably bullshit, but it didn't matter. Some part of me still believed my pistol possessed actual magic, magic that would transfer to me, transform me if I held it long enough. Marines flickered in and out of shadows as they ran crouched along the berm, underneath the stony light of gently hanging flares, eyeing me, as if expecting some kind of an answer, a solution. I squeezed my pistol until my hand ached. A rocket, then a flash. The ground shot upward. Brawley stumbled and fell the last few yards, like a disciple bowing in prayer, landing heavily across my back. He placed his mask against mine, pulling me close, his voice soothing above the roar. Ain't this some shit? I could hear his smile. He was clearly having the time of his life. "You good, senor?" I stared at him through our masks, his blue eyes focused and calm, tempted to spill my guts, but I held back. Truth was, I didn't need to say anything. Brawley knew, and that was okay. He squeezed me tight, his golden glove boxer's arm across my back, big and beautiful and reassuring. And like that, as if it was Brawley's arm that contained the real magic, it was over. With the help of some unseen Cobra helicopters, all those tanks became just more burning things on the horizon. Over cold MREs at breakfast, Lance Corporal Gibbs gleefully announced, "Hey, Lieutenant, sir, I saw you last night." "That was you? You stalking me, Lance Corporal?" I said, knowing Gibbs was going to dump on me. It was part of our routine. "Yes, indeed I did, and you weren't smiling. No, sir." Everyone laughed, even me, because it was true. I wanted no part of this, no part of the con. Shortly after we got back, my father died, prostate cancer, Agent Orange. His Smith & Wesson Victory, just rusty metal now, unable to save him. Brawley's gone too, throat cancer, all that dip. Me? I've got sleep apnea, ulcerative colitis, tinnitus. The VA sends me a check every month. Quote, beer money, mostly. I guess only the Marine Corps is immortal. But for now, I'm alive, and I'm not unhappy about that. Gas. Thank you.
I'd love to see if we have some questions from the audience, if that's okay. Well, I'm just a little worried about time. We're at 9:22. How long is the next one? Thank you for your service. Okay, why don't we do one more quick reading?
Yeah, it's real good. Dude, if it's okay with you guys, we want to ask questions. All right, this is called "Thank You for Your Service, Sucker."
Lovely.
Yeah. Thank you for your service. I'd heard it hundreds, maybe even thousands of times since leaving the Corps. I'd always responded with, "You're welcome," or some other equally bland response, a verbal placeholder. They mean well, these grateful Americans, but have no idea. Their impression of my time in the Marines comes mostly from the movies and TV. Gentlemen, shh. Jack Nicholson bellowing, "You can't handle the truth," on a Hollywood witness stand. A reworking of the King Arthur Sword in the Stone legend in a recruiting commercial. The uniquely American promise of, quote, transformation realized. Or at a ball game, as some old guy in a wheelchair is rolled out like a museum exhibit, choking on the dust of oblivion, as the organ plays the Marines' hymn. He waves. The crowd dutifully gets to its feet, cheering. The franchise loves it, adding as it does an implied meaning, a touch of grace to an otherwise graceless commerce, a wolfish buying and selling in sheep's clothing. But what does the old vet get out of it? Was it worth it for him? Some context is in order. As a former lieutenant of Marines and veteran of the righteous wrong known as the Persian Gulf War, I'm not in a wheelchair yet, but I do have ulcerative colitis. Mild to severe, says the doc, and tinnitus so bad that it's made me see the upside of a bullet to the head. With my luck, even a bullet wouldn't stop the ringing. Sleep apnea, too. And so they thank me. At first, it was touching. A crocheted lei from a first grader at a Honolulu elementary school as we stepped off the plane from the Gulf. A six-pack on the sly from a sympathetic bartender in Eau Claire, Wisconsin. A medal from a grateful foreign nation, one that now sits in my garage beneath a broken microwave, old tax returns, and mildewy camping gear. In my darker moments, I sometimes wonder if the, quote, gold is real and how much I might get if I sold it. I've seen them before in cardboard boxes at yard sales and flea markets. I wouldn't get much. They certainly could afford it. Don't just write me a check. They certainly could afford it. I made them a lot of money because ultimately that's what it's about, money. It was always transactional, my service to this country. The medals are merely a romantic attempt to suggest otherwise. So when they thank me, these Americans, maybe it's just a smokescreen for their complicity, their guilt. I think about this as my father, the Marine pilot, with his own medals from grateful nations, lies marooned 86th, done for, in a bed at Bethesda Naval Hospital. I've spent the past 2 months soothing him with wet washcloths, wiping his ass as Navy corpsmen, half his age, roll him on his side like cowhands branding a bull, and massaging his still powerful legs, the pillars of a ruined temple. When I stop, hands aching, he moans, begs that I continue. He's 56 and won't be coming home. I just want it to be over. As I do my best to ignore him, to escape, even momentarily, my father, his cancer, this hospital room, my phone rings. A collection agent. He's all business, skips right to the unpleasantries. My deadbeat status has rendered all small talk void. Civility canceled like a bad debt. He grills me about my overdue cell bill, lectures me on financial responsibility, my duties as a good American. After a few moments, I tell him of the bill, a now infamous phone bill that cost a month's pay as I called home from the Saudi desert. Like a forensic accountant testifying before a grand jury, I do a painstaking recitation of the 29-year-old bill, a kind of clerical torture, even remembering the exact dollar amount, $1,385.56, $1991, I remind him. He's confused, but that's all part of it. The muddying of the waters, pitting his patriotism against his capitalism. Thank you for your service, Mr. Keene, but I want a new cell phone. I cut him off. The one made out of titanium. I like the way that sounds. Titanium, like a weapon. Free cell service, too, for life. And a monthly stipend. Beer money, say $500. Adjusted yearly, of course, for inflation. There's a pause. He's checking his script, presumably. In the silence, I offer salvation, a way out. Look, I'm a reasonable man, a disabled veteran, a fellow patriot, you know, a free market capitalist. So I'll cut you a break. Just send that beer money and I'll let you slide. And then hang up before he can resume his good citizenship lesson. The smokescreen works both ways. It's for me to disappear behind as well. Since then, I've kept an informal tally, a dollar amount on how much my service was worth and whether it balanced out the true cost. Losing 30 pounds when I didn't have 30 pounds to lose. Being admitted to the hospital when the urgent care doctor shuddered and said, "Ooh, you look wasted, bro." The clumps of hair, the blood, the looks on my kids' faces as they realized I might not be around to see them grow up or have their own kids. It's just a nagging condition, I assure them, but maybe it's not. Maybe I won't live that long. And the scary thing, that thought is actually comforting. There's an inscription on the back of that medal, the one from the Grateful Nation, written in Arabic. I'm afraid to have it translated for fear it says, "Thank you for your service, sucker." But nobody joined the Marines to get rich. I knew that going in. I wanted transformation. I wanted to be a Marine, like my father, like Brawley. I remember Brawley, Carl, how he bear hugged me when I found out Dominic was HIV positive and dying. Didn't say anything, just hugged me, because he knew. After his memorial service, I carried Brawley in his box, California sun streaming through Iwo Jima flag-raising stained glass windows at the Camp Pendleton Chapel, to be loaded into his truck with boot camp graduation pictures and leftover Costco cake. I hugged Evangeline, his wife, remembering how she'd fed me gallo pinto, Costa Rican rice and beans after a long night drinking. Carl passed out on their couch. Evangeline was a mother to me when my own wouldn't, even though she was only a few years older. I remember Gibbs, his 50th birthday in Acres Homes, North Houston, drinking beer and shit-talking, playing bones in the backyard. I take great comfort knowing a seat awaits me at their family table, heavy with pork chops, gumbo, and homemade boudin sausage, fat with Gulf shrimp, oysters, and crab. Francis don't eat like your other white friends, Miss Rita said. "Oh, Mom, why you got to do the lieutenant like that?" Gibbs laughed. "A seat in the pew, though I don't believe in God anymore, at least not in a God created by men. A bush tall boy waiting in the garage refrigerator on a humid H-Town day. Ice chips making a humble can of beer seemed like an indulgence, quote, the water of life, like Irish whiskey, as I sat with Mr. G, listening to staticky blues on the radio and child-rearing wisdom, as he, retired from 2 jobs, now raised his grandchildren. He offered me a place to hide out, to disappear, should the need ever arise. No questions asked. You stay in my house, under my roof, eat my food, drink my beer. You just show up, I'll take you in." I remember Harris. My son worked his farm in Alabama last summer, slopped hogs, dug holes, went hunting, hoping some of that Harris grit, that magic that made cigarettes defy gravity, would rub off on my LA kid. When I went to pick him up, we got drunk on moonshine, strained through a, quote, clean Hanes undershirt into an empty handle of Captain Morgan, how they do it in Shelby County. Harris is a Glenlivet 18-year man. The moonshine, my request, a nod to the romance in my blood. As we drank, we were surrounded by the Harris family, if only in the framed photographs of the departed. The fathers, brothers, cousins, uncles, grandfathers, all wearing the uniform of the U.S. military. Harris's family and thousands of others have borne our nation's burdens since Crispus Attucks caught the first bullet at the Boston Massacre. Harris even ends each phone call with an unapologetic, "I love you." And what did I do to deserve such love? Maybe because we suffered together and that bound us. So if colitis, sleep apnea, and tinnitus are the price to be a member of this tribe, then so be it. Because it was never about money, it was about transformation, just not the way the TV commercials promised. You're welcome.
So, I don't know if we have any questions, but we have time for 2 or 3 questions if anybody has.
Of course, I'm happy to ever a little water of life.
Quick question, were you the only child in your family?
No, I have a brother who's just like a year younger than me, Irish twins. He actually went to the Naval Academy too.
Was he in the cattle chute also?
I'm sorry, in the what?
Was he in the cattle chute also?
No. The whole different, we don't have enough time to talk about that. I was the favorite, and as my father told me, that's some heavy knowledge. My brother was not.
No, just interesting dynamic. Just
Yeah.
curious about that. Any other questions? We got a couple back here.
So if we ditch the myth or surrender the myth,
Yeah.
nature abhors a vacuum. Don't we got to replace it with something? What do we do?
Maybe, I mean, I'd say the idealized answer is we replace it with the truth. But I don't know. I don't know if we're capable of that as human beings. Because I think even like surrendering the myth in a way is kind of a myth. So I think we're kind of screwed either way. And I think human beings, like we love myth. We love origin myths. I mean, because I think we all live, I think, as great as our lives are, but it's kind of boring though sometimes. And I think, whether it's imposter syndrome or whatever, I think that we like to believe that, again, I look at General Doolittle's picture out there. Wow, the Doolittle raid. Talk about myth. I think in a way that we need that proximity to myth to give our lives more meaning and that proximity to magic or whatever maybe adds magic to our own lives. So I don't think we can get rid of it.
Any other questions? Okay, great.
Brian, thank you so much for
Thank
coming
you.
today. And to our audience at home, thank you very much for tuning in. I would ask you to get off your couch and get your ass down to the Adventures Club and experience this 5,000 square foot museum of everything from shrunken heads to stuffed animals.
I've said I cannot sleep inside the house unless I sell all the books, so they're $20 a piece.
Yeah, we take Visa.
Yankee dollars, I take them all. So anyway, and I'll sign them all. So thank you everybody.